Hello, everyone. I'm Alvaro Vitta. I lead cybersecurity globally for Microsoft Public Sector, and I'm thrilled to be here with Sachin Jade, who is Cyware's Chief Product Officer. Good morning, Sachin. How are you?
Good morning, Alvaro, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me as well.
Awesome. So today we're diving into one of the hottest topics in public sector cybersecurity, how we can enable collective cyber defense at scale and gain true situational awareness across sectors, right? Regional, national organizations, as well as critical infrastructure. We'll talk about key challenges, opportunities, and best practices we see across the world. So Sachin, in the first half of 2025 alone, ransomware attacks on government agencies went up by 65%. That's just not a number, of course. It's just a wake-up call, right? The threats are real. The stakes are higher than ever. So let's talk about how we can help these organizations leverage collective cyber defense and share operations at scale to enhance their cyber resilience. Let's start with cyber resilience. So 95% of countries could face a major GenAI-driven attack by 2027, but only 30% are expected to be resilient enough to prevent disruptions and breaches. So Sachin, what are you hearing from customers when you talk to them about how they're improving collective cyber defense and situational awareness and how they're using GenAI or other mechanisms to protect against increased GenAI-powered cyber attacks?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question to start off with, Alvaro. And unfortunately, I think every day it's a new headline that happens with some attack coming either from the human identity or the non-human identity in one way, shape, or form. And 30 seconds about my background, been in the security and risk space for so long that I have seen different ways that the attackers have kind of changed their modus operandi. What used to be thought of as like, hey, this is an old technique, it will not be used, etc., are now kind of being brought back into the forefront. And they're leveraging all of those that used to be there before as well, and some new techniques. And so one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of the customers is kind of focusing on three buckets. One is if they have to protect themselves in one way, shape, or form against these, previous attacks, the traditional ways, the newer ways, the Gen AI ways, etc. First of all, identification of like, hey, what's the data? Where is it coming from? Is it important to understand whether it's a human identity, non-human identity, how that's going? And then second is how do I collaborate with the other folks who might be leveraging as well, or who might be getting unfortunately exploited? And last but not the least is how do I put this in the process and the pipeline that I use today? And so our conversations kind of stem from, it's a spectrum. Our conversations stem from individuals and organizationals at the regional level, at the state, local level, who are just trying to get a bearing around it. And then some of the more mature organizations who have understood that the essence of collaboration is kind of focused on not just the sharing of the intel, sharing of the actionable intel, but at the same time, giving the other party in that collaboration module the capabilities that they can take action against as well. I did the analogy or the team, the whole book of team of teams, right? So that's kind of the mantra that we talk about with our customers as well, and for example, the collective defense that we approach with as well, which is the data and the intel that has to be shared across the different parties, the different counterparties appropriately, etc. But contextually, each of the other organizations or each of the party have to take their decisions that is relevant to them, which means that if you get the right data to be shared, number one, in the first place, you can actually take the appropriate decisions. Now, when you bring in Gen AI and the AI unfortunate exploitation that may start to happen pretty soon as well, to your point, This gets exacerbated because not only are you, have to share the data with the other counterparts appropriately, but you got to do it at such a rapid scale because the attack vectors are increasing by themselves and the threat velocity is increasing. You have to have the frameworks in the process to take care of that. So, which means that a lot of the organizations are looking at, industry leaders such as yourselves and us, in identifying what are the different frameworks. Maybe it's the MITRE framework. Maybe it's the joint CDC framework, saying, hey, you know what? How do we basically leverage these things to not only identify the data, the action that needs to be taken, and who is the other party that we need to share this with. So these are some of the things that we are hearing. The challenges in this that I hear significantly sometimes is with respect to how do I even identify what that data is that need to be shared, because there is so much noise. How do I figure out the signal around it? So those are some of the elements. Let me pause there, Alvaro.
No, that's great. That's great information. And it is obvious that cybersecurity is a team sport, right? And without cyber threat intelligence collaboration as part of a team, that collaboration at scale is not feasible, right? And so one of the things that we've done at Microsoft is we partner with Cyware in that spirit of collaboration, right? To help organizations around the planet be able to enable the connective tissue that allows cyber collective defense at scale to occur, right? When we look at regional, national organizations, when you look at centralized security operations centers, what are some of the common challenges that you see and some of the best practices that you also see to overcome those challenges, Sachin?
Yeah, it's funny you say it's a team sport. So I still play soccer, love soccer. So I used to give this analogy to my teams, which is if you have those, two soccer teams playing, the defenders always try to play by the rules, saying, yeah, you know what, this is how we will defend, this is how we will, there's 11 people in the team, etc. And when you look at the attackers and the threat attack vector team, if you will, they absolutely never follow the rules. They may have 11 people, they may have 44 people, they may have 100 people, who knows what. They may be using 4 soccer balls to score the goal. They may have infiltrated the fans in one place so that the fans are playing for them, etc. So it's a unfair game to a certain extent when you are trying to deal with these threat attack patterns and threat attack vectors. And so for the regional, local players, as well as organizations at the national level, especially the critical infrastructure side, integration, it becomes so important. And, the integration that we have with you folks, as well as what you have brought to the market as well, becomes extremely critical. Some of the best practices that we have seen, we have advocated for as well, is, I would say, falls under 2 categories or 2 areas. One is leveraging some of those industry standard frameworks, be it the STIX TAXII model, so that everybody talks about the same taxonomy, etc. And then the second piece is, how do I figure out the legal and the political collaboration that's needed to happen as well. So a lot of the times this partnership, the process and the framework is a combination of the technical, and the second part is the non-technical piece as well. On the technical collaboration best practices model, we do advocate for that entire bidirectionality and the bidirectional capability that needs to be brought in, because you need to have the regional organizations get the data from, let's say, the ISACs of the world, because that's a good source of that golden truth, if you will, to a certain extent. But once it comes in, and if there are certain elements of enrichment that happens on one way, shape, or form, it would be great if that actually bidirectionality is brought in so that that information goes to other parties as well. And this is what we try to do from a collective defense standpoint with this partnership as well, which is, if a particular attack happens, or an identity of compromise, or even on IOBs on the behavior side that we are seeing these days, is you try to understand that there is an attack vector, there's an attack threat actor that has done certain components. Members or organizations on one end, what we call the left-hand side, which is just observed that attack, when they identify certain capabilities that the behavior of the attack pattern or the attack vector, they can identify what the attack chain could look like, leveraging tools from our from Cyware's capabilities and Microsoft capabilities as well, bring it into the bear of that central ISAC unit and so on, so that you can now have the dissemination of this to other organizations on what we call the right-hand side, because they may not have seen this attack yet. But because now this information has gone in a standard format from a STIX TAXII, it becomes so easy and scalable for that interoperability. Now on the right-hand side, tools such as Microsoft Sentinel, Defenders, etc., you can start leveraging that so effectively then to say, yeah, what, we can block certain things, we can change the alert patterns, we can change what to look for, etc., and create that defensive pattern that's much more strong. Now, to make this happen, you've got the technical capability that underlies this entire infrastructure, which is a great partnership. Then you bring in the political, legal partnership that needs to be brought in from a public-private landscape as well, because not only do you need the public organizations, the state, local, regional, national level to kind of collaborate with each other, but just by the very nature of the threat attack surface, any private institution that might be working with the public institution, if they get exploited in one way, shape, or form, there is a risk exposure on the other side as well. And so that from your ISACs of the world, your ISAOs of the world, the public consortiums, public-private consortiums, that starts to help out as well. So this is how we kind of start to look at the best practices on the traditional data sharing, which is more in the standardized way. Not only that, then you can have the standardized threat defender libraries that can be shared as well. So not only what the attack looks like or the attack identification of compromise, indicators of compromise, indicators of behavior, indicators of attack as well, but the actual defense that you can take with for those indicators as well. So you do all of those things. The other challenge that we have seen that can be overcome is from a cost standpoint, because a lot of the regional players, etc., are short-staffed. They have challenges with respect to the resources, their bench strength, how much they can leverage in terms of identifying individuals and human resources to take care of that and so on. And this is where the advantage of this partnership and the power of automation, AI, etc., start to come in pretty much, because going back to the analogy of the soccer game, the only way that the defender team can start to protect against this kind of an attack surface, which is not following the rules, is by working with a whole bunch of other players and amortizing the cost, which means that what the left-hand side has already, if some other team had already seen this, that, hey, this is how the attack players typically work, and that information has already gone to the next team that's going to be playing with them, against them, they have already gotten that information about that forewarning. And so you amortize the cost, which means you can now do more with less. So the resource problem can be solved as well with this information sharing, and not only the information about the threat, but the actual defense that they can take and so on. So that's how we kind of see, and that's how we advocate as well.
No, that's great. And everything that you say, I align with. What I would say, I would also add, in terms of standardization of a platform, of course, is key. Technology, it's hard to do things when you have everybody having different standards and technology or different platforms. The policy part that you mentioned, of course, the economies of scales that you gain by bringing everything into a central location and sharing all of that, that's absolutely on point. And also what helps, especially at a national level, is when there's cybersecurity compliance that act as an enabler, as a catalyst for these organizations to be able to do it. Because sometimes just the voluntary way doesn't move the needle, right? So you have to create some kind of compliance mechanism that says, okay, well, here's the compliance elements that you need to do. If you're a public sector organization, a critical infrastructure organization, for example, like NIS do in Europe, right? Where in the EU, there's 10 directives that organizations need to adhere to. And so that allows the movement of organizations to be able to say, oh, we have to do this, because if we don't, right, there's 7 to 10 million euros in penalties potentially if we don't do it. So there has to be also that compliant element to be able to force that sometimes unnatural and resistant for people to collaborate. Now, if we look at privacy usually comes up as a concern, right, between organizations that, well, I'm going to share either with a central location, whether it's a National Cybersecurity Center, an ISAC, whether it is a central operations SOC. They say, well, how are you going to safeguard my data? What are you going to do with my data? What assurances do I have that my data is going to be okay? And so one of the things that is key and important is communicating to these contributing entities, these collaborative entities, how that data governance functions, how the data is going to be encrypted at rest, in transit, in processing, and what are the safeguards that exist to be able to safeguard that data. Is that what you see as well on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I was at a ISAC event earlier this year, and then following that, another state, local, regional in DC, where we were talking about, how can they leverage AI, etc. But one of the things that kept coming up was that even if, let's say, there is the notion of, hey, we can leverage AI, we can share, we can partner with other organizations, etc. But who defines what I share, what data should I share, and what happens to the privacy and the private information that I am sharing, potentially? Like, for example, this particular state local organization was alluding to their own township and their customer base, etc. There are utilities there, which means utilities are sending information, but along with that, it is information about their citizens to a certain extent, saying, hey, you know what, XYZ individuals, and this is the anonymized data around that, and so on. And so the question that kept coming up with is, if we need to share it with the broader organizations and the regional and the local and the national organizations, how is that protected? What happens to that data? And what are the legal ramifications if certain things go beyond the bounds? And the conversations that we've had with them kind of fall in kind of two or three buckets. One is the technical capability around what can be done and the mathematical concepts behind certain solutions behind it. Second is, of course, to your point, that legal and the compliance things that need to be brought in appropriately. And the third is that whole governance model of like, okay, what exactly is this zero trust data sharing to a certain extent? So if I break it down from those aspects, we tell, we have, when we have these customer discussions, the technical component, there are ways to do certain things, and the audience and yourselves have probably heard about this entire concept of homomorphic encryption, data that can be shared on an anonymized data only at the especially, let's say, for example, you are using AI models and the LLMs and so on, you might want to just use the weights as opposed to the actual data underneath the covers and so on that gets set for a training or inference standpoint. And last but not the least, from a technical standpoint, my hypothesis around this is also about synthetic threat intelligence, right? The concept of I will leverage certain data that I have, but I will, train it based on what the synthetic data would look like, which could mimic the actual data, so that I don't have to actually share the real data and so on from a privacy standpoint. And then from a homomorphic encryption standpoint, it is just the signals as well as the results that can be shared, so not the data itself as well. So there's a technical part which is feasible that is coming up with a bunch of players and vendors. The second part is that legal compliance standpoint, saying, true segmentation around data, what can be shared, what is legally allowed to be shared, what is legally not allowed to be shared, etc. From a regulatory and a compliance standpoint has to be brought in as well. And a lot of the players that we work with at the SLTT as well as federal, state and federal level, they are bringing these regulations around, what are the specific components of data that can be shared, what cannot be shared, and so on, and leveraging some of the Euro notions as well. Last but not the least, this entire concept of governance around the data model itself or the data sharing, which is even if the first and the second is good, which is technically you can only you can share what you want to share and have the only the signals to be shared, etc. And then the legal framework around what can be shared from a segmentation standpoint and so on. But there needs to be this thought process around the framework that we keep advocating, which is even if these two are good, always think of the zero trust model for data sharing, which means that the only resource that needs to be accessed is by the individual or identity rather that is allowed to access that resource. And it is short-lived, which means you use it for the purpose that this particular identity is allowed for in a zero trust model. And once that usage is done, the permissions, the authentication, the authorization is revoked again, and that has to follow that pattern. So that at any given point, the risk exposure is so low from the data that gets transmitted from a privacy standpoint that you can mitigate and manage those risks appropriately. So those are the three buckets that I typically look for in terms of my conversation with the customers. And products such as ours truly start to enable and help them in one way, shape, or form. And more and more of these are going to come out because of the GenAI capabilities, both on the attack side as well as the defense side. But I think this is how the industry also has to evolve.
Oh, thank you. That's great. Great insights, Sachin. And what I like about the partnership between Microsoft and Cyware is that Cyware has this capability of disseminating, kind of acting like a traffic controller of cyber threat intelligence between disparate organizations, and then being able to leverage the analysis, the GenAI capabilities, the intelligence found in products like Sentinel to be able to then action that, right? And be able to leverage this in our unified security operations experience so that customers can go from detection to response to remediation very, very quickly. And I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. That was very insightful. Hopefully our audience can learn some of the great best practices that you share with us. For more information about the partnership between Cyware and Microsoft, visit the Microsoft Sentinel blog page. And in there, you'll see more information about our capabilities and how we interact together. You can also visit, of course, cyware.com/technology-alliances/Microsoft. And in there, you'll also learn a little bit more about the partnership as we look to enable cyber collective defense at scale around the planet. So thank you, Sachin. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you on the field with customers together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alvaro, for having me. This is a fantastic conversation, and I look forward to more of these with our customers as well.
Thank you.